Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this week for What's New in Global Mapper Pro version 25. If you were here last week for the webinar on Global Mapper Standard, thank you for coming back. And if you are new today, welcome. My name is Jeff Hassel. I'm a product manager here at Blue Marble, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Mackenzie Mills. How are you doing today, Mackenzie?
I am doing well, Jeff. Thank you for having me on this webinar.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you for being here to walk through some of this with us. For those of you who are new to Blue Marble webinars, we are in listen only mode. And so that means hopefully you can hear us, but we cannot hear you. Please utilize the questions panel section of the meeting dialogue. So we will do our best to keep an eye on questions and answer them as they come in, and we usually follow up afterwards with any answers that we have missed. So we love hearing from you. Please send us all your questions that you have come up. And if anybody has to leave early today, or you were just so enthralled by us you want to listen again, this session will be recorded, posted to our YouTube channel. And I believe if you were registered for this event, you will get an email telling you when it has posted. Mackenzie, do you want to tell us a little bit about what we have coming up in general at Blue Marble?
Yes, I would love to. So we do have one more webinar scheduled for this year of 2023. It is again tied to a product release. We'll be going over what's new in our geographic calculator program. So that is different from Global Mapper, a different installed program for advanced geodesy, coordinate system management and transformation. So if you're interested in some of the geodesy side of things, I would definitely encourage you to tune in on November 8th. You can visit our website, bluemarblegeo.com/GeoTalks Express webinars to see some more details on that upcoming webinar and to register, so you'll get reminder emails and get a recording if you're unable to attend on the day.
No, it's funny, Mackenzie, I was looking at our calendar to make sure I wasn't missing any other upcoming webinars here, and I realized like at this point it's basically the holidays, so we have one more, and then everybody's winding down for vacation. I can't believe it's the end of the year already.
I know, it seems like it's gone by so fast.
And what do we have coming up on the training side of things here at Blue Marble?
So we have a couple more training sessions for the end of the year here. Currently this week, we are, teams are conducting a Global Mapper training session. A little bit late to register and join for that one, but next week is the counterpart to that, which is LiDAR processing training, all about working with some point clouds. If you are interested in getting in some Global Mapper and LiDAR processing training before the end of the year, I would encourage you to check out the classes we have at the end of November leading into the beginning of December. Global Mapper training from November 27th to December 1st, and then LiDAR processing training from December 5th to 7th. Those are online sessions, so they are instructor-led, hands-on. You can ask questions and we will answer them, and you'll definitely learn a lot about how to best utilize the tools in Global Mapper. We will have more training sessions coming out for 2024 for next year. So keep an eye on our website. Feel free to check on our website to learn more about what other public GIS training classes we may have coming up in the new year. Additionally, we do have some introductory self-training available for both Global Mapper and Geographic Calculator, our two main product lines here from Blue Marble. You can visit training.bluemarblegeo.com to take a look at those courses. Those are both free to access and just go over the basics of working with data and some of the basic functionality of these two different programs. It's a great introduction, if you're a new user to Global Mapper or just would like to review some of those basics, or if you'd like to explore a little bit more of our more intense geodesy program, Geographic Calculator, and explore that functionality perhaps before the webinar in November.
Yeah, and I'm excited, Mackenzie, that you know, you and I and the whole training team are still working on that online site. So if you're into the kind of online self-guided training, keep an eye out in the coming months for even more you know, workflows and things up there that will probably help you get into a little more advanced and specific functionality in the application. I know Mackenzie and I are both, you know, working on writing some new content now. So just keep that in the back of your mind if you'd be interested in that.
Yes, another place to check in for maybe some updated content on using Global Mapper and Geographic Calculator as time goes on here.
All right, so let's get into it today. We'll start talking about some of the bigger new features in Global Mapper Pro, this version 25 release. We'll talk about the new least cost path analysis. That's a really great terrain analysis tool. Pixels to Points has had a variety of improvements. We've had some new tools that we have created really, you know, pretty much based on customer feedback. So from all of you, you know, writing to us and reaching out to us and telling us what you need to do and what you're trying to accomplish in your GIS workflow. So we have a couple new tools there for image painting and elevation QC. And then we'll talk about some larger updates to the point cloud classification process in Global Mapper and how we're working on redesigning that and adding some new functionality to that and a whole bunch of things. So to start here, let me go ahead and bring up Global Mapper and we will take a look at least cost path analysis. So least cost path analysis, which is always tongue-tying for me, allows a user to, you know, take a look at a location or several locations across a map and understand the, you know, best or most efficient way to get from one to the other. And best and most efficient doesn't necessarily mean the same thing to everyone. So users provide a variety of different parameters, you know, certain slope or elevation requirements, areas to avoid, and things like that. And then what the tool does is it suggests a route, you know, from and between multiple points. And so that's what we're going to take a look at here. At the base, the tool requires terrain data to be loaded, right? Because we're figuring in all of those elevation components into our analysis. Very commonly, you'll see this done for initial road or site planning, right? Because we want to have to do the least amount of work in order to build and construct our features. So what I have loaded here is a variety of points. So I have them just labeled as start and then subsequent destination points, but those are just the names I gave them. Our terrain data, which obviously we want to use as the basis for our analysis. And then also some areas that I am going to avoid, right? So I don't want to go through any of these areas, you know, whatever the case may be, they're not places where I can do any work. So this tool is located in the new raster analysis menu. Probably worth noting, if none of you or some of you weren't here last week, we used to have one really large analysis menu, and so we split that out based on component. So we have a vector menu, terrain analysis, raster analysis, and LiDAR analysis, just so you can find things a little bit more quickly. Things are a little more organized. And so from the terrain analysis menu, we're going to go ahead and take a look at find least cost path. First thing I want to set up here is what data I'm going to be working with. I could have selected points. Maybe I want to specify a location. I'm just going to go ahead and grab my currently loaded point layer. If I wanted, I could reorder this list and drag things around, but by default, it's going to inherit the order based on the way the features are structured geometrically in the point layer. But you can always adjust that and move them around. They drag and things like that. So you can set that to whatever you want. The names are just for me to know, right? You can put whatever name there you want. Variety of ways to choose how we're going to analyze our data. So I'm just going to go from the start, subsequently down the list, but we could go from start to each destination, or, you know, let it pick the route that has the overall least cost. I am going to set some avoidance settings here. So I have certain criteria that I need to follow for my road. In this case, I need to set my maximum slope to 20 degrees, not 200 degrees there. And I'm also going to make sure to choose those area features that I want to avoid because I don't want to go in that area. I like to combine my outputs for this type of analysis. So I have, just one output line, but a couple other settings here. I could, give the output layer a different name. And other than that, I think we're okay. We'll go ahead and run this. And it, takes just a second to run as it analyzes all those potential routes. And what we get from this process then is a new line feature. That line feature, as you'll see, let me zoom in here a little bit, makes its way in order from my start to destination 1, over to 2, and then off over to 3. And this is just a standard line feature. At this point, I can, take a look at its geometry, maybe more importantly, use it for some subsequent analysis down the road, whether I'm, flattening, buffering, volume work, whatever the case may be. I now have this as my basis of where I think is going to be the route to take for this work. Again, this just exists in Global Mapper now, right? You could export it out to any file format you see fit, that supports line features. Maybe you need to apply some elevation to it, save it as a 3D feature, whatever the case may be. But so a really useful tool for those of us who are in the planning world and need to kind of understand before they get into actually moving terrain and ground, how and what might be the best way to do that.
This to me, Jeff, ties in a little bit with a tool we talked about last week, which was optimizing a flattened site plan creation. So this is, instead of optimizing an area, this is optimizing a route through some terrain using points as destination, essentially. So it is a really great and powerful planning tool. And as Jeff mentioned, you can turn this line into an area really easily with the buffer tool, apply elevations, and continue with any editing, interacting more with the terrain down the line in your work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see that very much, those tools as an extension of one and the other, right? You're probably doing more than just the route planning, like you said, with your planned sites and everything. So taking a little bit different approach now, we'll move on and take a look at some of the updates to the Pixels to Points tool. And that tool is our photogrammetric processing tool. So not a lot of flashy data to start with here. What I have loaded in the application is just a very small subset of images from a flight that we conducted. They're just picture points at this point, right? I haven't done any rectification yet. I can click on one and quickly see what that image is showing and what it represents. You'll see also a little estimate of its ground footprint as well. And so one of the updates here, which we can't really show easily, is, but we've put a lot of time and effort into improving the processing time and speed of this process. So for those of you who have used Pixels to Points for a long time, go ahead and take a look in the new version. In many instances, we're seeing speed improvements of up to 50%. Some of that obviously depends on your hardware and the data you're working with, but we're seeing really nice speed ups in the tool and letting us run through these larger data sets, not like the one I have on screen, much more quickly. So definitely take a look at that. But then perhaps more importantly, for those of you who use the tool regularly, or maybe you're new to photogrammetry, we've totally revamped the wizard so that it more specifically guides you through the photogrammetric process, right? There can be a lot of options, a lot of settings, and maybe you don't need all of that. So the first part of the wizard is simply just setting up your project. What are you naming it? Where are you putting it? Pretty simple. You then have a way to choose what data you want to work with. So I could have loaded individual files or a folder, or I didn't have to have the images in my workspace to start. But I'm going to go ahead and just load those picture points. If for some reason I wasn't getting metadata or the incorrect metadata from my pictures, you can always adjust some of that here. Adjust maybe what images you want to use. Maybe you loaded a couple extra. You could always uncheck those. Now, where we get into some of the handier things is you can very quickly choose what your main type of processing will be, right? So maybe you just want an ortho image, a point cloud, or a 3D model. We also have quick options for those, and you could think of those as the trade-off of faster processing, but more of a medium quality product versus the most higher quality product you may want to create. And each of these project types will give you a little bit of a feel as what type of image orientation and flight pattern might apply to a product like this, or what these might be best for. Once you've chosen your main project, you can then go ahead and choose any additional outputs. And this is something that's unique to the wizard. And what it allows you to do is quickly utilize other tools built into Global Mapper without having to dig into all the advanced settings. So if you want to quickly build a surface model or contours, you can do that. Maybe you're making the ortho image as your main product, but you also want a sparse or dense point cloud. Products you can make as well. And if you're someone, maybe you're really into analyzing the quality of your flight, you can save your camera position information as well with field of view, so that you can tell, in the end, how well your flight was, and if maybe there's some issues in your output data, more easily highlight where that may have been within your flight. So at this point, you could go ahead and run the tool. That's it. You could start it. If you're someone who needs to get into the more nitty-gritty, advanced settings will bring you into the full tool. Here you could do things like we've always had available, setting control points, maybe adding some masking and some other advanced options here as well. But so that wizard really gives us a way to speed through a lot of that for those of us who don't necessarily need to spend the time digging into all of that, and they're just looking to get a certain specific product out of the application quickly. I'm not going to go ahead and run that now just for the sake of time. Our outputs won't look any different here. The highlight of that was the wizard there. All right, Mackenzie, do you want to tell us a little bit about a couple of the other new tools here? I can send the screen your way.
Yes, I would love to do that. I'm going to start with a workspace and talking about the new image paint tool for some manual raster editing. So let me take the screen, make sure I'm showing the correct one, and we should see Global Mapper pop up here with a tile of imagery loaded.
It looks good.
All right, so I have a couple layers in this workspace, just some basic imagery, some Landsat imagery here, and then some land cover data to demonstrate a palette image as well. We're going to start with just our image layer. I have an overview map activated, so as I zoom in, you guys can see what I'm looking at, what portion of the image I'm zoomed into here. And the image paint tool, as I mentioned, is a tool for manual raster editing. So changing the pixel values in a raster image, whether that is, aerial imagery like this, satellite imagery, a palette image, any of that pixel-based raster image data. This tool can be found in one of our split out analysis menus in the raster analysis menu. It's got an icon here, meaning that we can also find it on a toolbar, and it does also live right next to our other manual editing tool for terrain data, our Enable Image Painting button. So if I go ahead and click that, it opens my image paint options. And this is a dialog that is dockable. As I grab it and move around, we see some arrows start to pop up, and maybe I'll dock it right above my overview map, just to help organize the interface of Global Mapper here. And at the top of my image paint options, I have the layer that I want to paint or edit. This layer dropdown will contain all of the visible raster layers in a workspace. Currently, I've hidden my land cover layer, so it's not appearing in my dropdown, but I want to work on this satellite Landsat imagery layer anyway. So working down this dialog, we have operations for how we want to go ahead and edit some of this some of these pixel values in this image. We have an option for filling color, which will be what I'll use first with this particular image. We have, applying a specific color to a pixel or set of pixels based on the brush type selected. You can lighten or darken some pixels in an image, cut holes or mark pixels transparent in an image, heal the color, so sort of average and even out the color within a certain area, or simply replace one pixel value for another with a color. We'll look at that one a little bit more when we are working with a palette image here. The last operation we have is, of course, reverting any pixels to their original value. So, undoing some of that work there. As I said, I'm going to start with the flood fill color. And with this image, it's, pretty coarse imagery. We're just looking to, further define more explicitly the coastline area here. So I'm going to use the flood fill to apply an even color, be a light blue, to all of this ocean area off the coast of Cape Cod here. So I have my color selected, and this fill color button is going to go from wherever I click my cursor, work out from there, matching colors based on my color distance match setting here. So I will set this to about somewhere around 40 and just click in our ocean area. And that flood fill kicks in, and pretty quickly we can see that drastic change in this area. We have our ocean has been changed to this light blue color, and that color distance match has taken care of any variations in that ocean color directly from the image here. This can, of course, be used on smaller areas as well. Wherever I click is going to flood fill those smaller areas. Another option that we have here is to heal a color. And this is a little more applicable with an area brush type here. So, all these brush types pretty similarly mimic the digitizer vector feature creation styles that are available in Global Mapper. And if I want to heal the color in an image, maybe get rid of this, these few pixels, but these 5 pixels that weren't colored with my flood fill, I'm just going to click and drag to create an area trace mode around that, and we'll see that color even out, taking on the color from the surrounding pixels within the area that I have traced. So a little bit more fine-tuning editing able to go on there. To take a look at some of the other options available in the image paint tool, I'm going to go ahead and close it, and I will swap out what layer I am looking at, moving to this palette layer for some land cover data. I'm going to zoom in so we can start seeing these palette pixels pretty clearly in our main view. And once again, I'll open the image paint tool. Now with my one raster layer visible in my workspace, that will be automatically selected. I can dock this in the same place. And our color drop downs are now showing palette colors. So we're pulling from the colors available in this image. And I will choose the apply color brush to apply a specific color, maybe developed medium intensity. We've increased development in this area perhaps, to a specific pixel. So my brush size for this is going to be 1 pixel. And since I'm working with a palette image, I am going to set my feathering to 0. I don't want any blending to happen throughout these palette values. I just want to change the explicit pixel that I click on. If you can see my cursor on screen as I move from pixel to pixel, it's snapping to those explicit pixel boundaries. So as I click on any specific pixel here, we're just converting that one pixel value to the color that we have selected. You can increase the brush size, maybe make that a little bit larger, and then it will work on a larger area of pixels. It's also good to note that similar to the terrain painting tool in Global Mapper, there are undo and redo buttons at the bottom of this dialog. This also works with the keyboard shortcuts Control-Z and Control-Y for undo and redo, allowing you to maybe undo some recent changes or redo those changes to the image while you're in an image painting session like this. So another tool that is particularly useful for working with some palette images is the replace color operation. So again, I'm going to select the replace color operation. I will select an area mode here. And in this case, instead of being able to apply my selected color to any pixel that I click on, I can choose that I only want to change my developed low intensity pixels from my palette to a developed medium intensity value. So now if I trace around a larger area, only the pixels meeting my color to replace criteria are going to be changed. So it's an easy way to sort of change a bunch of pixels within an area without having to so exactly click on some specific pixels. And this functionality is somewhat similar to the existing raster reclassification tool available in Global Mapper. But with this manual process, you're able to work on just a portion of an image or update, maybe a few land cover pixels in an image like this instead of bulk changing all of the pixels in an image based on a specific rule. The raster reclassification option in Global Mapper is also available in the raster analysis menu for maybe applying some larger changes to an entire image instead of this more fine-tuned manual pixel editing.
Whenever I see that tool, Mackenzie, it always impresses me more and more every time I work with it or see someone work with it. It came out really well.
It did. I like that we have all these operations as visual buttons and the brush types, and it seems pretty intuitive to use here, and is a really powerful option for updating images or just doing any small edits that are needed. And it's been something that has been requested by users for quite some time now. So with that, I will move on to another workspace in Global Mapper here. Swap this out for some elevation data, another pixel-based form of data, but this time working with some 3D. And talk about the new Elevation QC tool available in Global Mapper Pro in version 25. So this tool is very similar to an existing tool that we had to work with point cloud or LiDAR data layers and 3D control points. That would be the LiDAR QC tool, where you can vertically rectify or vertically adjust a point cloud to fit some 3D control point vector features. This Elevation QC tool is the same idea, but working with a gridded elevation layer instead of a point cloud, and then adjusting that elevation layer to a set of control points. So in this workspace, I, of course, have some elevation data. This is some gridded data that I have here for a small area, and I have some control points as well scattered throughout this area. Using the feature information tool, I can click on any of these control points, view what attributes are associated with them, not a lot of information going on here. We just have elevation values for these control points. So these are 3D points. And that is necessary for this vertical 3D adjustment. So the Elevation QC tool can be found in the Terrain Analysis menu or on the Analysis toolbar. And opening that tool gives you the option to select the 3D control point layer or layers you would like to use, and the elevation grid layer or layers that you would like to compare the control points to and possibly adjust. There is also an option here similar to the LiDAR QC tool to use only selected 3D point features if you want to use a subset of control points available in a layer. Since I only have the 2 layers loaded, one control points layer and one elevation grid layer, those are automatically selected for me here. I will click OK, and Global Mapper will run that comparison. It's going to compare each control point to the elevation grid at that local area and come up with our grid elevation at the area, the elevation of our control point listed here, and the elevation difference. So we can see we've got just under 0.5 meters of vertical difference between our control point set and our elevation grid here. This can be further explored with the Path Profile tool as well. This orange point is my control point. And then, of course, we have our terrain layer shown in the Path Profile tool. And we can definitely see that there's an offset there. And that matches the offset that we're seeing in this feature measurement information. These feature measurements can be copied to a clipboard, pasted to an external report, saved to a CSV file, but they are also added, all these values are also added as attributes to our control point features that we're using in this process. So I've done this comparison. At this point, I haven't actually vertically adjusted an elevation grid at all. I've just done a comparison, so we're able to see if this grid is well aligned with our control points and whether it needs adjustment or not. Seems like this grid needs a little bit of adjustment, so I am going to choose to fit the grid to the control points. Yes, I do want to do that, and Global Mapper quickly executes that process. I can then close and save the grid. So I'll close this dialog and save the grid. And instead of adjusting the original grid here, Global Mapper creates a copy of the layer with that adjustment applied. So this layer inherits the original elevation grid layer's name appended with adjusted elevation so that we can note that this is the edited or adjusted version of our grid. And we can compare these 2 grids, in the 3D viewer if there was maybe a larger offset, but in the Path Profile tool here as well. So we can see our original grid and then our adjusted grid drop down a little bit lower to better fit those control points. So if you're not starting with a point cloud, if you've had an elevation grid delivered to you with a set of control points and you need to do a little bit of vertical rectification to make sure that that data is as accurate as possible, this new Elevation QC tool is great for checking the accuracy of that elevation grid against some vector control points and then applying an adjustment if that is necessary as well.
So we had a really good question come in, Mackenzie. Somebody asked if you could use this process to transform between vertical data. Their example was nav D88 to ellipsoid height. The answer to that is that's really something that Geographic Calculator is designed for. That's our dedicated, Geodesy geodetic transformation tool. But it's a good point to note that Global Mapper doesn't anywhere really consider vertical transformations. So in this case, if you wanted to assume your source data was in the same vertical datum or being aware that it might be in 2 different vertical datum, what global mapper is just seeing is the raw elevation value there.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jeff, that global mapper isn't, working within those vertical coordinate systems. It's just reading that elevation value and interpreting that as just a Z value, sort of as simply as possible to display and work with that data in the program. So the onus is on the user a little bit to know and have a little bit of intelligence about their data to understand, whether some vertical transformation needs to be applied using perhaps the geographic calculator program.
Yep, exactly. All right, thanks for walking us through that, Mackenzie. I'm going to steal the display back and then go ahead and talk about one last new tool here. So what we're going to look at now is a variety of updates to point cloud and LiDAR analysis in Global Mapper Pro. So for those of you who have been using Global Mapper for a long time for your point cloud analysis, you'll probably be familiar with the multiple tools we have for those different workflows. You might have classified ground or noise or non-ground. You may have extracted some features as well, all in different tools, some of which even had different methods within those tools. And so what we wanted to do as we were looking at streamlining this process, but also adding more functionality to it, was trying to get that into one specific tool, and that'll we'll take a look at here in a second. So right now I'm just looking at a RGB point cloud, has elevation value, traditional information. I have already done the classification and the segmentation that we're going to talk about just for the sake of time, but we'll go ahead and walk through that process and see what it looks like. So the new tool here lives next to pixels to points on our toolbar, and it launches a larger window that is by default set to classify. And so we'll talk about kind of what this looks like here. So the left-hand side of this window really handles all of the larger or maybe initial settings. I don't want to call them generic settings because some of them are specific to a certain type of workflow or analysis, but they're ones that we would generally look at first. Whatever process you choose to do, whether you're classifying, running a dedicated segmentation, or feature extraction, all of those will get dedicated panels here where you can dig into further settings as needed. I'm just going to go ahead and look at classification right now to start. Below that, then the settings here on the left-hand side are all the settings that are going to apply to my classification as well as my extraction. So these can be thought of kind of as shared settings. Different types of classifications will have a different set of settings, right? So vegetation might have something a little bit different than buildings. And those are adjustable, but of course we're providing a built-in model as well. All of my classification settings and options are exactly the same as they've always been. And I can expand and collapse them as I need to. So if I'm only concerned maybe just ground classification, I'll start right just with ground. If you run subsequent analysis, which you could do all at once, the application will know how to handle that. So it will start with ground and then look to things above ground, building, power lines, vegetation, and things of that nature. Global Mapper has traditionally had an automatic point cloud analysis method that we call the gridded method. And as I'm sure if you've been following us, you'll know that we started to add segmentation-based methods that we're calling maximum likelihood methods, and these are a little bit more advanced. But the user has the option to choose whichever they may need. Generally speaking, the gridded methods are better for higher altitude fixed wing aircraft derived point clouds. And then when you get into something maybe a little bit more complex, something terrestrial, drone acquired, then you might look to your maximum likelihood settings. So just two different methods there that you can choose how you want to process your data. Otherwise, nothing else has changed. I might want to maybe change a method, go back, adjust some settings. All of that is available to you, and you'll see a little update information on the bottom. So if you can't remember what this setting does, just take a look at the little info box on the bottom and it'll tell you. One of the newest features here is the ability for custom classification. So that's what I want to take a look at now, mainly because feature extraction and segmentation haven't changed. Same settings, same tools and options here, more or less, just in a new window. Custom classification, which technically is still in beta, allows users to define their own classes and then go ahead and train those classes with training samples so that the application can find the rest of the objects in question. So in this workflow, I went and did this for airplanes. So let's take a look at this by classification. And this is done already, so you'll see where my airplanes were found. But what I did was I took a look at this point cloud based on its segmentation. And segmentation allows us to see smaller features of an object, right? It might be a different roof plane, it might be different plane on the airplane's wing, whatever the case may be, it shows us different components of the structure. And while not required, what it allows me to do is a little bit more visually see my data. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to add a class, and we'll just call this airplanes. And this class by default is empty, has no information, no statistics, which you don't really ever need to see in most cases other than knowing that they exist. And so that's what I need to build. To do that, in this case, I'm going to use the segmentation selection tool, but I could very easily use the digitizer or the polygon selector, whatever you needed. I like that the segment tool allows me to quickly go through, grab some segments, and then I can collect it as a sample. And I'll say that's going to be an airplane, and maybe I'll do one more. So we'll do this exactly like I did when I ran it initially. And I said, okay, this is my airplane. Let's add another sample, and said sample is an airplane. Now, once those samples exist, you'll see now a training button under the model itself. So I'm saying I have some samples. Let's go ahead and train on those airplane samples. And that went pretty quick. We probably didn't even see the status menu, but if you expand your settings, you'll go ahead and see there's now parameters here that define what we think airplanes look like. Very often that's called a signature. Sometimes you'll hear it called the fingerprint. But what that means though is that airplane class now exists, and under the classification menu, I have the ability to classify airplanes. We don't have any further parameters here, right? Airplanes are something we totally created, so you won't see any further options here other than that it'll run off of all the statistics and settings that were predefined by the classes or by the options that you selected for the training samples. Clicking classify would let the classifier run. For the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and skip that right now. But when we color LiDAR by classification, we'll go ahead and see now, and this one worked really well, we'll see my airplane features. And they happen to be this pinkish color here. It's worth noting when I'm doing something like this, I like to have many, if not all of the built-in classifications done already, right? So I did ground, buildings, trees initially so that those things were out of the way and they didn't confuse anything. I also went and did some cars for this data set, so it was the exact same process. And the cars are smaller, they don't come up great on the LiDAR always, right? Maybe we have a pickup truck bed or, reflection off the windshield, but this can be applied to other structures and features of that nature as well. And so what this allows me to do then is have that class as part of my point cloud. Worth noting that this gets a custom class ID, so one that isn't used by the ASPRS definitions by default. And if you had the desire to, maybe the built-in algorithm really wasn't working for your ground. Let's use ground as an example. You could go ahead and say, actually, we're going to retrain ground. It's worth noting, this would overwrite any defaults for the ground, which might be fine. It might work for your workflow. It'll be handled just as ground would be. You can always restore your defaults. Or you could just build a new custom class, and maybe you call it something like my ground, and then you build it with ground samples. So you could do that either way. It's just worth noting that if you update the built-in one, it will remain updated until you restore your defaults. But so again, all of this training and custom classification is brand new. It's still in beta. We would love people to take a look at it. It's so far been a really great way to begin to identify some of those custom objects you have in your point cloud that may not otherwise have some type of built-in classification tool. But I think other than that, that wraps us up with most of the major stuff we wanted to talk about today. Mackenzie, are we forgetting anything here?
No, I mean, you did a great job showing that tool, and it is, really powerful for identifying some of those more custom objects that don't have a built-in classification method in Global Mapper. One of the other things that I love about the redesign of our automatic point cloud analysis tool here is that the window that you have up allows you to interact with the data behind that's open in Global Mapper, and those are all dockable windows, so you can customize how this dialog is sort of set up and stays open in your Global Mapper instance, and still interact with your data behind, using the path profile tool, pulling up metadata for a layer to get some key values from that. So it just enhances the interaction with the data as you're going through some of this more intense analysis as well.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point. Thank you for bringing that up, because I hadn't considered that, especially as I was just dragging my window around here. Docking it would have been a good way to show how we can, clean things up and work through it as you need to. Okay, Mackenzie, do you want to, as we wrap up here, tell us a little bit about, if we have any users who are feeling the need to upgrade, or they're curious about the upgrade process, how that goes?
Absolutely. So Global Mapper Pro version 25 is out and available for download from our website. And if you are a current Global Mapper user, especially if you are on the latest version, before 25, which would be 24.1, the easiest way to begin your upgrade is to download Global Mapper from our website, bluemarblegeo.com, under on the Global Mapper Pro product page or under support, you should see an option for downloading the program, and you can install it alongside any existing Global Mapper versions that you may have on your machine if you would like. For licensing, you will need to have a current order number that is something that was purchased within the last calendar year, or a current maintenance and support, have renewed your maintenance and support for your license within the last year. If you have that and have your current order number and information available, you should be able to very easily license Global Mapper version 25 on your machine, when you open the program. You'll likely be prompted for that information. Dongle licenses may need to be updated. You can contact our licensing team, orders at bluemarblegeo.com for any questions about that. And similarly, network licenses may need to just be versioned up, and that's a pretty easy swap to be made in order to update your network license to license the latest version of the program, so you get access to all of these cool new tools that we have in Global Mapper Pro version 25. If you do have any further questions about upgrading to Global Mapper Pro in general, or upgrading to this latest version, questions about your order number, really anything to do with that licensing, please contact our licensing support team. That email's at the bottom of the screen here. Again, orders at bluemarblegeo.com.
Great, thanks for that, Mackenzie. We had one last question come in that I want to touch on while we're wrapping up. Somebody asked about a specific model key point classifier. We don't have that automated yet, but what you could do is there's a point cloud thinning tool, and I would take a look at that because that effectively will do a very similar thing where you could thin your point cloud out to retain only points of interest, especially in an area with a lot of vertical change, and go ahead and thin out the point cloud that way, and that would be the synonymous workflow for now. But great question. Mackenzie, thank you for all your help today as always, and thanks everyone who was here with us. Keep an eye out for the recording of this webinar. Feel free to check out our website or contact our support line, geohelp@bluemarblegeo.com, for any further questions you may have. Take care.